males really have more pressure on them. Masculinity is defined by these extremes. The extremes on the high end and the low end get the most attention. What's really sad about it is young men are feeling they're not enough if they're not these great athletes or have big muscles or are tall. People don't get that being a devoted husband and father is an excellent reproductive strategy.
Welcome to the Brad Carr Podcast. My guest is Dr. Carole Hooven, evolutionary biologist from Harvard, expert on sex and gender, and the author of T, The Story of Testosterone, the hormone that dominates and divides us. Dr. Carole Hooven, I've heard you say that you have dreams about what it's like to be a man. What happens in those dreams?
Well, we're getting right into it. So I would say, first of all, I had a dream that it did change the way that I understand male sexuality, because I was staying with my brother and his wife in like New Hampshire or something. So I have no idea why I had this dream, but I talked to him about it. And he's a nice guy. You know, he married his college girlfriend. He's always feeling like he wasn't, nice enough to somebody. Like, he's just such a good guy. And I'm very proud of him. And he's the farthest thing from a womanizer. However, when I described to him what my feeling was in this dream, he said, "That's it. That is exactly," I'm going to cry already. We just started, and this kind of thing makes me tear up. Because I guess before I tell you exactly, because it's going to sound weird coming from a woman and the fact that I dreamt about it, because I'd been studying male sexuality and maybe male behavior and how, men and women are different for so long. And that then I felt like I sort of experienced a little bit of what it might be like in this dream. So I guess part of it, why I started to tear up already, is because if it's a feature of someone like my brother, if he understands and this psychology, it's not about being bad or thinking that women are just sex objects. It's just a different feeling about bodies and a different way of being sexual. It's like almost something added on top of love and relationships and feeling sexual attraction to a kind of wider variety or greater and wider variety of stimuli. So in the dream, I'm going to try to reconstruct it. I actually think about it a lot. In the dream, I was just in the kitchen, standing at the island with some other people. And I'll just say for the record, I'm heterosexual. But in the dream, I was me, a woman, but I was sort of felt like a man attracted to a woman. But I wasn't, it was as though, and this is going to sound horrible, it was as though the person herself was standing in the way of my touching her and accessing her body. Like she was an obstacle to be dealt with, which is so weird because as a woman, when I'm attracted to a guy, my husband, of course, it's really more about the whole person. Who is this human being? What are they like? What is their whole body like? And it's completely different than what I had felt in this dream, which I actually never felt. Okay, one time I think I realized the first time I ever got drunk, like in junior high, and I touched some guy's, I shouldn't even say this, never mind. It was his chest. It wasn't like something, it wasn't worse than the chest. So in the dream, what I felt was this very strong pull to this woman's body. And it wasn't even the whole thing. It was like I was drawn to her shape, her form, and I wanted to touch it. And I felt that I had to work my way through her to do it. That's all. How I can describe, the only way I can describe it. And it was just devoid of the whole person. just very different from from the way I think most women generally feel when they feel a strong sexual attraction. It's not that we're never attracted to the way a guy looks. Of course we are, or the way he smells or something like that. But it's this thing about this really strong draw to have it, to be near it, to touch it. And that the person is sort of somehow seen as an obstacle that you have to figure out how to get around.
Mm.
So there
Just
it
the
is.
language that you're using. I mean, you're separating the person and it, like an object.
Yes.
What do you
Yes.
think
A
that
thing
even
that
means?
like food, like a thing that I
Mm.
want, I'm really drawn to, I have to have, and someone is like holding that food. And I've got to be nice to that person to get them to give me the food. That's kind of what it was like.
Uh-huh. What do you think is going on in men that could be connected to that?
Well, there's something going on evolutionarily, and there's something going on proximately, meaning, in the here and now. And I do think that there's an evolutionary reason why it's more, the sort of threshold for sexual attraction is lower. The bar is lower for men and for male animals generally. And that makes sense because they're not risking, like in mammals, an entire pregnancy. And lactation and all the time and energy that takes up for one offspring, where, a male animal who makes sperm, obviously, if they're successful, can potentially have many more children in the using the same kind of time and energy that it would take a woman to produce one. So it's harder for them to kind of make a big mistake, and they're not going to pay the cost that a woman would from potentially mating at the wrong time or with the wrong guy that's not right for her or is of lower quality, and however that might be defined.
Yeah. So you know all this consciously, and you can describe it like a professor. What was it about the dream that was important to you, or what clicked from that?
What clicks is something that just through my research on and many, many conversations with men about masculinity, and I can't talk about it without tearing up, which is weird. But this feeling, so women complain incessantly, and they're totally justified in doing this, about being objectified, right? They feel it, they know it, it pisses them off, it makes them angry, and it makes them, a lot of them, somehow, hate men or say that masculinity is toxic. But of course, they love men at the same time. And this is something that has to be dealt with. So to kind of feel, I knew intellectually that this is what is supposed to be going on, but to kind of have that firsthand, weirdly, firsthand dream experience anyway, I think it is what I should just, as an aside, what females do feel when they take male typical levels of testosterone, because I've had them tell me, and this is trans men, they get it. They finally get what it feels like in terms of this objectification of the sex that they're attracted to. They get it. They get what it actually feels like. And testosterone is that proximate mechanism. So for me, it's empathy. And I'm sort of naturally like a hyper, weirdly, overly empathetic person. Because it's strange to say that I'm empathetic. I feel empathy about this characteristic of men that is problematic, and it can drive men to even, in extreme forms, of course, sexual assault and posing a real danger to women, because obviously they're not caring about the person. They're caring about getting the object that they want, getting the sex that they want from what they feel obviously is an object, or else we wouldn't be treated that way. So it's a problem, but it's a problem that needs to be understood. And it's, most men do not act on, they might maybe stare at a woman's boobs for too long, and that's annoying too, but feeling it provides sort of an explanation for how it happens, and that this can just be potentially more common in men for biological reasons. And if they're more aware of it and aware that this doesn't make them a bad person, that this is part of male sexuality, I think when people are aware of things and where they come from, it gives them more control over how they express that part of themselves. So, yeah, we have to hold everybody accountable for their behavior. Um, but I think we can have a little bit more understanding that men are different from women, and we need to accept that. On average, of course, all of this is on average, but these are important differences that are present not only in humans, but something like this, of course, in male animals, where the sort of bar for sex is lower than for females. And of course, that has to be accompanied by certain by differences in perception and motivation around sexual stimuli.
Yeah, it sounds almost paradoxical that you would have empathy for a lack of empathy in a sexual attraction. Do you see a conflict there?
I don't see that it's a lack of empathy in sexual attraction. I see it as a hunger. Like, I think the food thing really makes sense, that there's a hunger for something that's a deep drive in a way that women perhaps do not understand. And so if we imagine that that could happen in ourselves, this could happen if we were born male or if we took huge amounts of testosterone, then why wouldn't you have empathy? It's not something that I think men are choosing, and many men do not like it. So on the opposite transition, when men block their testosterone and take estrogen, I've even been told this by older men who are getting treated for prostate cancer in their 70s and blocking testosterone, that it is a tremendous relief from this constant hunger, this constant need, this like constant work to inhibit that desire. And this a good friend of mine who was in his 70s told me this. And I could tell by the way he was acting. He was like a different person when he blocked his testosterone. So it's not something that anyone's choosing. It's not something I think that men are proud of. It's something they have to deal with, and they know it. And it's not easy for everyone to deal with that. And I think we can do things to support men in making it easier, and maybe stop with the toxicifying of masculinity. Because what we should really care about is behaviors. And but also, yeah, I think it just always helps to understand where they're coming from.
And you said there are things you think we can do to help. What are those sort of things?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to stop denying that the sexes are essentially the same and that it's socialization that leads to these differences in behaviors, because that, I think, places the blame for what is essentially I think, biologically motivated behavior on perhaps free will, or guys are hanging out with the wrong people, or they're listening to the wrong podcast, instead of, no, these are parts of who we are as male and female animals. And again, I think that providing information and understanding how things work does help people sort of be liberated from some of their baser instincts.
How important do you think listening to the wrong podcasts, as you said, the influence of this sort of stuff is? There's a lot of talk about the role models that young men, older boys have, and how much they consume media, more so than any other humans before them. So how important is that?
It strikes me as extremely important, because I think what young men, boys and young men should be doing is figuring out who they are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and what they need to do to be strong, competitive men. And when I say competitive, I don't mean they're out there trying to win football games, but maybe they're good at chess, or they're good at the piano, or they're a super nice guy. There's so many different ways to be a young man. Sorry. I have a 17-year-old.
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh my God. So what, sorry, this is always hard for me to talk about because I guess what's really sad about it is young men are feeling they're not enough if they're not these great athletes or have big muscles or are tall or whatever it is that people are feeling insecure about. Young men are especially are feeling insecure about and thinking that they need to have. And I think that's definitely social media is a part of that because you see these exaggerated figures representing masculinity. This is masculinity. If you want to be successful, here's what you have to do. And sometimes it's just act like an asshole. And that's obviously not the way to go for most, any really young men. There's so many other ways to be a success in achieving your goals. If those goals include like having a girlfriend or getting married and having kids, which is really a great way to go for most people. So yeah, I think experimentation and taking risks and playing with your friends outside, getting off social media and seeing who you are and where you fit in and what you can be good at if you work hard and develop some skills as a little kid, which a lot of those skills start with rough and tumble play. And people need to realize that that's super important for most boys, not all boys, but most boys, to help them figure out, how male hierarchy works and male relationships work instead of being on their screens.
So, Carole, rough and tumble play is crucial for the development of boys. And yet the sort of over-the-top masculine archetypes that we see now on social media, these guys who are jacked and rich and assholes, as you said.
Some,
that's not the thing that we want to go to from the rough and tumble play. But we've also established that the bar that women set is much higher sexually than the bar that men set. So these guys do still need to stand out in some way. What's the path there?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. There isn't one path. And that's what's great about just free play for boys and letting them work things out because, and again, this isn't true for all boys, because a lot of boys aren't into rough and tumble play and they need to do something very different. And, but male animals who, are in species, like just take rats or chimps. So if a status hierarchy is important in that species where males form status hierarchies, and that's adaptive for them, and it actually reduces violence. These status hierarchies are organized in a way so that males can just signal to each other, no, I have priority here, you're subordinate to me. And they can cooperate and defend territories. So status hierarchies are very important. And when you don't have dominant males, and you don't have these signaling mechanisms, then it's sort of like all hell can break loose. And if you don't learn your place and how to read these signals and when the dominance can change and where, like there's status hierarchies all over the place. It's not just these interactions in rough and tumble play are not just about who's physically better than another person. It's how do you negotiate your status and read these signals to de-escalate violence and have it be fun and playful. And your, males, my son was doing this and when he was little and some of that still continues with his dad, even though he's sick. My son is 6'1", my husband is like 6'2", and it's like to see them go at it, they're laughing and it's affectionate, but they still need to do it because at least my son, I think, needs to do it because he's entering the adult male hierarchy. So the young men have hierarchies in school, like who's the smartest, who's the best musician, who's the greatest actor, who's the best on the football field. So there's all these different arenas in humans that are really interesting where any kid can kind of figure out what his place is, what he's good at, and there's going to be a place for him. And then you just have to throw yourself into it. And boys, as opposed to girls, really interestingly, and men as compared to women, are much more likely to focus on one thing. They have obsessive focus. It's called, like, in the literature, I think it's called obsessive focus. Like in chess, I wrote this article on sex differences in chess and why men outperform women in chess so consistently. And one of the reasons is that they also do the same thing with Scrabble at the tournament level. Even though verbal ability, females are typically better at verbal skills. It's because the men are sitting around and reading memorizing whole dictionaries and like a whole different number of languages because they want to be number one. And you don't find women, they want to play Scrabble and have fun and be good at it, but they're not going to devote like 6 hours a day to memorizing a dictionary. And there's something similar going on in chess. It's this intense one-on-one competition. There's a lot at stake. It's about, people think, and it is to a large extent about, has something to do with intelligence, but what really gets you increase in the rankings is practice, and memorizing different strategies and moves. And boys and men are more likely to do that, even little boys, to just practice, to be number one at one thing. So that is because that is the strategy that works for males more than females. And that it's like a kind of status move, really, that seems to be more important to boys and men.
Mm-hmm. As you're describing this with chess and Scrabble, I'm sure there are countless examples that come up. I'm thinking of Jeopardy. The ratio of winners, male to female in Jeopardy.
Oh, do you know the ratio?
I know it's very skewed.
Yeah,
it's come up in some of my other discussions.
Yeah,
but just I mean, that's something about that obsessive focus I do see more often in men.
Yeah. No, it's interesting.
Yeah. So how can boys, men figure out what their thing is? If it seems that to stand out, they've got to find that one thing. I mean, you've got your son going through something like this. How do they do that?
I am not an expert on that. I think it's really risk-taking and experimentation and hard work and not. So I think what is happening now to some degree is that the availability of screens and, online gambling, pornography, video games where you feel that you're earning status because you're getting better and better at the video game. So there's like a hijacking, I think, of the motivation and reward systems that would have been sort of stimulated in real life interactions that do guide all of us through, our development and kind of getting better at things and figuring out who we are and into our hierarchies and social lives. And when you have these opportunities, if you are frustrated or you feel that you don't fit in or don't have the skills or you're nervous about rejection or taking risks, you can get some of those needs met through screens. So I guess for me, the biggest advice would be put them away, go out in the real world, even if you're nervous or scared, you've got to try to get over that in the real world, because I think that's part of why social anxiety, things like that are increasing right now because of the screen taking away the motivation to do what evolution has kind of sculpted us to do, which is to be out in the real world taking risks.
Yeah. So it's clear how video games would fill that, because they're often literally designed like adventures, sort of classically masculinized adventures where you're collecting weapons and you're forming a band of warriors and you're going to go and conquer the enemy's castle or something. The gambling and the pornography, how do those play into it?
Well, I think you can figure out how the pornography plays into it. So, like, a vagina is something that you normally, throughout evolutionary history and across most of the world, you don't just get to see those in real life if you're a man, unless you're working hard and making an investment and it's something that you're really motivated, not just seeing a vagina, but that is like pornography, right?
And is it that
seeing
simple?
a naked woman.
Is it that simple that it's that the visual stimulation is enough, that there doesn't need to be a sense of developing a relationship or sort of courting, or even maybe kind of the excitement of, oh, am I going to get rejected? Am I not? And overcoming that threshold. It's as simple as the visual stimulation.
No, I definitely don't think it's as simple as that. And I'm not an expert on what exactly is going on neurologically,
Okay.
but it is an option for people. And
Okay.
it's I don't even know what the exact numbers are, but I don't think you might know more about this than I do. I used to know these numbers about time and money that men, as opposed to women, are spending on pornography. Like, there's some huge percent of men watch porn, and a lot of men watch a lot of porn, and young men are watching. As far as I can tell, the research on this isn't great because it's hard to get permission to do the research on younger men or older boys. But the research, from what I understand, points to the idea that and we don't know what is cause and what is effect, but the fact that this is an option for young men, that they're consuming it, that they're getting this kind of they're acquiring the stimuli that they would have been pursuing in real life. Of course, they're not touching and having a relationship, but there's something is being, there's a motivation there and there's a reward there.
Okay.
And it's like, yeah. So I think that pornography is a huge problem. I mean, I think that some people can use it responsibly. Certainly, I'm not anti-pornography. But I think especially for young men, it's a big problem, especially if it's interfering in any way with their motivation to take risks out in the real world, to improve themselves, to approach girls or women, to get rejected. If it in any way is interfering with that, that's a problem. In terms of gambling, that's a feeling of taking risks and waiting for a reward, and occasionally, getting rewarded. Again, if that is in any way satisfying this drive that we have, and I think that's mostly men who are doing the gambling also, if that's satisfying any part of that drive, any significant part of that drive, that's a big problem. If video games are satisfying any of the drive to improve yourself in order to increase status, or competing to increase status, that's a huge problem. So I don't see the downside of really putting the screens away for the most part, especially until kids are older, but then really limiting the interaction with those, I'd say, 3 kinds of domains.
Okay. So with these situations, then, the important thing is for boys, young men, to be getting out, taking risk. But with all of these, it's going to sort of dull that desire. And time is a zero-sum game.
I don't have firm evidence on that, and I'm not sure it exists, that screens actively inhibit the motivation for risk-taking or, status seeking, whatever, in real life. But that is my strong intuition, and I'm not even sure those studies could be done, because you can't have a randomized study where you give some people, screens for years and some people don't have exposure. And plus, like, kids who don't have exposure have all these other things that are going to be different about their lives and health.
Yeah. And I'm thinking too, time is just a zero-sum thing. So an hour spent on video games is an hour that cannot be spent outside. Same with the pornography, same with the gambling.
Right.
That kind of thing. So how do you navigate this as a parent?
I actually didn't have to navigate it. And I have been trying to understand why this is. It could just be my own kid. I only have one. We only have one. But one thing we did do, and not really even intentionally, we always have dinner together. And ever since my son was little, we talk about, I'm married to a philosopher, and we talk about big ideas and research and evidence, and we have arguments. I think he decided when he was little, like he didn't have an iPhone until a few months ago, and he's 17. So he just didn't have that. He didn't play video games. He was usually making stuff or playing in the yard with our neighbors when he was little. So he saw all his friends getting iPhones, I remember him saying that when he would hang out with them, they would be playing video games, and that wasn't interesting to him. So I think he then wanted to be the kid who didn't do this stuff, like it was a way of differentiating himself. But I think he also believed that that was the right thing to do. So yeah, we're very lucky that that was just not an issue.
Yeah, totally unheard of these days.
I know. I know. Teachers didn't believe him when he wouldn't turn in his phone. He's like, I don't have a phone. But we didn't have to tell him not to get one. We also didn't hand him an iPad. We did a little bit when he was little, but that was not really the strategy.
Yeah. So Carole, before we started recording, we talked a little bit about masculinity in the world, and it seems that maybe with your work, there's a sense that testosterone, masculinity, there's a lot of biology to it. I wonder what you think about it also being sort of a culture unto itself. Like other cultures, there's a way of speaking, there's a way of dressing, there's a value system. What do you think of masculinity as sort of a culture? And is it, like other cultures, vulnerable to maybe being wiped out?
No.
Okay.
It's not going to be wiped out. That's because men are different from women in some fairly consistent ways across cultures. And that's not going to go away. Those ways are not leaving us. I hope what is wiped out is, I think social media has also made this worse, but it is the defining of masculinity through the extremes of masculinity. So one interesting thing about sex differences is that male traits are just much more spread out in terms of the variance. Like if you had a bell curve of most male traits, take violence, it's going to be lower and flatter, and the tails are going to be longer than female traits. So you'll have more males who are extremely violent. Actually, this doesn't quite work with violence, because you'll definitely have more males who are extremely violent than females who are extremely violent, like up at the right end of the tail. And that distribution, you'd have like 95 males for every female who commits like violent murder, say, and it's like that for many traits. So I think the problem with the culture of masculinity is that masculinity is defined by these extremes, because it is the extremes on the high end and the low end that get the most attention. So male violence, male sexual assaults, people, like an Andrew Tate type behaviors. These are not typical of most men, but they are the ones that get the most attention. And of course, violence is one of the biggest problems we face as humans. And it is mostly men who are the ones who commit the most extreme acts of violence. So of course, that's getting most of the attention, but people don't quite understand. It's a hard concept for people, I think, to understand that doesn't mean that masculinity is aggression or is violence, or that testosterone, it means aggression and violence. It doesn't. But it does help to explain why the sexes are different on average. But the average is distorted by what is going on at the extremes. So if there's a lot of male violence on the very high end, yes, males are definitely more violent on average. That doesn't mean that the average male is violent, right? And that's really important. So I think there's the culture is just full of distorted stereotypes. And I think that's a problem, because the more I look into what male behavior in other species and the variation of male behavior in humans, what is adaptive for males is not necessarily these extreme behaviors. Those are, a lot of these behaviors have to do with extreme reproductive strategies that some males use when they're not successful using other strategies. A fantastic strategy is to be a really nice guy. People don't get that being a devoted husband and father is an excellent reproductive strategy. In terms of male psychology anyway, and in terms of our evolutionary history, you would have a very good chance of having several surviving children. Whereas if you take the high risk, high reward strategy that someone like Andrew Tate represents, actually that strategy has a high chance of failing, like flaming out. If you win big. But if you lose, then you're totally out of it, out of the game. But if you're a nice guy who works hard at being trustworthy and is a, devoted father, etc., and mate, that is a very stable reproductive strategy. And people are now saying, this is a low testosterone guy or low testosterone strategy. That's just not true. There's no evidence for that. What the testosterone is doing is essentially helping males determine what their best strategy is going to be. Testosterone makes guys and boys even who had high testosterone in utero sensitive to their social environments in a way that women are not. Sensitive to what's going on in terms of the competitive landscape, for instance, and where they fit in and what strategies they can use and where they have to pivot and when. So
I want to come back to sensitivity to social competition, but first, let's sort out something. So a good reproductive strategy is to be the kind of man who is, what do we say, sensitive and like caring for the partner and that sort of thing, and trustworthy.
Sure.
Focused, committed, that kind of thing.
It's one strategy.
A nice guy.
It's not the right one for everybody, but yes, it's a very good strategy.
Being the nice guy is a very good strategy. Devoted husband, devoted father.
Yep.
And we said earlier that to be selected, the bar for men is set much higher. So you have to stand out initially, but then you want to be a nice guy?
You can stand out by being a nice guy. So when I talked about that variance in male traits, that reflects something like the need to stand out, right? So everybody isn't a nice guy. We have all kinds of different strategies that males use, and they might be they're equally successful, but they're different strategies to fill a niche and use whatever skills or you have as a man that take into account who you are. What are your genes like? What's your basic personality like? Are you outgoing? Are you shy? Are you just inherently nice and empathetic? Or are you like a hard driving, super competitive, athletic, tough guy? It depends on who you are, where you came from, what your resources are, what your privilege is, all that stuff. So any different strategies are able give guys different ways to stand out. Like being a great chess player, that you're not violent, you're not being an a-hole. Well, you may be, while you're playing chess or whatever, but this is something that shows that you have certain skills, you're ambitious, you're smart, different kinds of strategies work in different environments for different people. There isn't just one, but the point is that males really have more pressure on them, in my view, to kind of find one that works for them. There's so much to take into account, to consider, and to kind of properly execute. And women don't necessarily face those same kinds of challenges because they're more likely to be in demand, essentially, because we are doing the work with our own bodies to reproduce. So there's an asymmetry there.
Okay. So you want to stand out, but then a good strategy on top of that is to be a nice guy.
No, I'm saying that's the standout.
You think that's unique? I mean,
that
is it something that people sort of take for granted?
Yes.
If you're a nice guy, people sort of...
Well, it depends. Plenty of women want a nice guy who's also successful at something and can be a good provider. But you could be a nice guy and be a good provider. And a lot of women, I think, when they're ready to get married and they've been through the womanizer or whatever, are more interested in a nice guy who's going to help out around the house or whatever. It's a different strategy for maybe a different kind of woman.
What does your research say about this sort of thing, about men who are maybe more agreeable or less agreeable, that kind of thing?
And how often they're chosen?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay.
No, but I do know that in male animals, these different kinds of strategies also exist. It's not just humans. Like in birds, male birds who don't have the ability to have the brightest, biggest feathers and sing the loudest, most perfect song. So those are the male birds who get the highest quality mates, who were born in into great conditions, always had enough food, have low parasites, and they're like really flashy. They can do well, but they end up going out and cheating on their mate. And that puts the kids at risk. So there are risks and costs to being that flashy, high status guy. And there are then female birds who specifically choose males who show that they're going to be devoted partners and fathers and show that they have the skills to do that, even if they don't have the flashiest feathers. And if you look around human cultures, there are definitely all of these different strategies that males use. Some males go and have sex with as many women as possible and do not invest in their offspring. That is a risky strategy. And who knows when, if they're if they're mating with a woman, at a time she's fertile. If you're married and you're having regular sex, you're going to increase your chances of actual reproduction, and you're there to take care of the kid. So we know that there's cross-cultural differences in these strategies and that these different strategies do exist. I don't know about the numbers, but I know that there are extreme strategies and they're more sort of conservative, reliable strategies. And the culture has a huge amount to do with which strategy guys use. I mean, there's certain cultures that really encourage marriage and monogamy, and there's other cultures where there's polygyny, and there's a lot of males who can't find a partner, and there you have an increase in violence in those cultures. So that's well studied.
Yeah. How important do you think testosterone is for being chosen as a man?
Well, you want to have a male typical level of testosterone for sure, but testosterone level is not important.
So there is an indication that, say men who are higher in testosterone are more likely to, be chosen for sex, fatherhood, that sort of thing?
So what I can tell you is that individual differences in male testosterone in adults within the healthy normal range don't predict much, other than to some extent they can predict muscle mass. But what is important is fluctuations in an individual's testosterone. So how your personal testosterone moves around is going to affect you and your behavior and your body, et cetera. And it's much more important than I could predict, maybe how you will change when your testosterone level moves around in any significant way, even staying within the healthy range. But I could not, see 5 guys in a lineup and even with everything I know about testosterone, it would be hard for me to predict who has the highest testosterone right now. We do what I think is more important that nobody seems to or people I think often miss is the importance of perinatal testosterone, which I think is tremendously important. And that is the testosterone that the male fetus is exposed to. And then there's another stage of high testosterone exposure a couple months after birth, and that's called mini puberty. And I think those levels are very important because they permanently affect the brain, and it's called the masculinization of the brain, and that happens in humans and non-human animals. So there are, we're not it's hard to get really good research on individual differences in testosterone at that stage. What's most important is to be in the typical male range for most of that developmental period during these critical stages where the brain is particularly sensitive to testosterone and the body. But males, because of high testosterone in utero, are actually born longer than females. They put more pressure on the placenta, and they have rough and tumble play, not because they have high testosterone while they're playing. They don't have any, really. It's not really different from girls. Yet you have these very distinctive behaviors in boys versus girls. I don't know why people aren't thinking like, yeah, that does tell us something that suggests that how much testosterone you have right now isn't like motivating your behavior right now necessarily. And that there are permanent changes to the brain that shape male behavior and differentiate it from female behavior. And then even if you never had differences in testosterone in puberty, which of course we have massive differences in puberty, you'd still have big differences in behavior. And I'm just going to say there's interesting, at this point, mostly anecdotal evidence, but from say trans women, again, who in adulthood, after going through male puberty with high testosterone levels, after being exposed to high testosterone in utero, they still retain some typically masculine behaviors, even though they have blocked their testosterone in adulthood. They certainly have more of a, male typical body, but there's also some suggestion, I think strong suggestion, that there's, something like libido will have declined, often there's other behaviors that seem more male typical. So I guess the point is that I think we place too much emphasis on individual differences in testosterone. We should pay more attention to what goes on during puberty, because that's another really important stage that has permanent effects on male brain and behavior, that can have long-term effects on like propensity for aggression. And signaling, because if you have a high testosterone puberty and you grow into this big muscular guy with a pronounced jaw and big brow ridge, for instance, you're signaling something socially that regardless of your behavior, you're going to have a different social experience. So testosterone can, just by virtue of its effects on your body, lead to a different social experience, which of course is going to shape who you become.
Okay. So being an adult man who has slightly more testosterone or slightly less, as long as you're within that normal band, generally not something to worry about. But we want to think more about how we developed up to that point.
Well, it depends what you're trying to explain. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about health conditions, current testosterone matters. And, if you're on the low end, there's, of course, aging, and there's there's so many confounds with aging and health. So, being in poor health, being obese, being diabetic, not getting enough exercise, not getting outside, being depressed, being anxious, being stressed, all of these things, smoking can lower testosterone. So when people say they have low testosterone, the best answer isn't always like, let's give you testosterone. It's try to become more healthy so you produce more naturally.
I see. So, Carol, earlier you said that males have more of a sensitivity to social competition and that landscape. And what I've heard often is that men are oblivious to the social scene and that women are much more socially attuned, and that was an evolutionary advantage for raising children together and that sort of thing. So how do you see the difference in men and women and picking up on the social landscape?
So I'm going to just throw this back at you
Okay.
because you're a guy. Do you think what you just said is true, that women are more attuned to the social scene and that men are not very well attuned to the competitive scene, which is part of the social scene?
Hmm. So if we were to split it, I think
Yeah.
what I would see is that, yes, men are extremely aware of where they stand in competition with other men in all kinds of domains, and that men often see things as competition. At the same time, I often see situations where women are more aware of the network of relationships, of the nonverbal cues, and sort of who's looking at whom in what way, and that sort of thing. So I could see both.
Yes. Okay. And I think you're right. And so there's two things. It's the aspects of the social environment that men and women are, and boys and girls are differentially attuned to. And then there's the consequences of missteps or
Mm.
strategies that don't really work or that do work. So men are more attuned to competition, and females and status and hierarchy. Females are also, so humans, I don't want to get too off track, but in humans, because males do have the potential to invest heavily in offspring and be long-term partners, females, of course, compete in their own ways that are not always the healthiest, for for status and for particularly male attention from high quality. I'll just say high quality males, although that's completely subjective. But it means ultimately males who will be who are smart and ambitious and honest and able to provide, or signaling that they will be able to provide, and good looking. Sometimes similar things to what um, men find attractive. But so, yeah, I think you're right. Females are very attuned to the social environment in the ways that you said. But I guess the difference is that, first of all, I think, as you're probably aware, they're going to compete with each other in very different ways that are less direct than males would. And I think that the stakes for males are higher. So I think there's a different pressure on males to be sensitive to the competitive environment, and to respond to the signals of status, and to figure out whether to challenge or whether to behave in a subordinate fashion, essentially within a status hierarchy. And men have to navigate that within a number of different hierarchies. Women don't have the same systems. We have not evolved the same systems to recognize status, to resolve conflicts, and then kind of reorganize a hierarchy. And my friend Joyce Benenson has done some fantastic work in this area. She's one of the probably top researchers in the world on the sex differences in how we compete, and the fact that it's very difficult often for women to resolve conflicts. So if you're not going to confront somebody directly, it's hard to then have a resolution that makes sense for women. And often there is a lot of sort of backstabbing and gossiping and passive aggressive moves. And then we lack the ability to kind of get in a fight, and then, okay, there's a winner and a loser, essentially, whether it's a chess game or an argument or an actual, like, an insult to your face, like, hey, you look like you gained a lot of weight. You say that to a woman, it's like the end of the world, and we're not going to resolve it for a long time, if ever, right? It could end the friendship. But for men, it's like, no, you guys have the mechanisms, evolved mechanisms, and this is pretty well demonstrated, to quickly forgive and then take it as okay, maybe we reorganize the hierarchy here a little bit, or there's an apology, or there's just, it's not sort of carried the resentment or hurt or whatever it is isn't quite as intense, and it's not sort of carried through the relationship in a way that leads to its destruction in the same way it is for women.
And what are those methods that females use to compete?
Well, they're different methods. One is denigrating the two big things: denigrating the sexual reputation of other women, and denigrating the looks of other women, but sort of spreading rumors in ways that ultimately can affect the status hierarchy among women, which can then affect how appealing women are to men. Or I think the idea behind that for women, and it's not a conscious idea, because these I think are really have to do with staying safe and not exposing oneself to threat in a direct way, which is what women are more likely to do. So it's just sort of less confrontational, generally, strategies that where the individual who's doing the denigrating may not even be named. You might never know who's doing this, or you have to work to find out. So it's protecting the aggressor from retaliation. Whereas men are much more likely to say to another guy's face, "Hey, fuck you, you did this thing to me," or "Fuck you, you asshole," or insult them to their face. And then somehow, this is probably a mystery to a lot of women, can just get over that. Like, I don't know if it's forgiveness, or you were never that upset by the insults in the first place, or you take it as part of whatever masculine banter, and there's less sensitivity in some circles. Of course, this is, again, and this is like these differences are on average. There are some women who are very direct. I'm one of the more direct ones, and it does not always work in my favor. And I literally have to work hard not to do that. So that's something I'm always trying to do, is to not be as direct as I just am naturally. And it gets me into some trouble. Like, it got me into some trouble with my whole career. But I sort of like, I'm attracted to just knowing what people think. So you have a chance to respond. You have a chance to respond honestly and work out any tensions. But yeah, there's a big sex difference there.
The gossip method that you pointed out, if you don't even know who it comes from, and then all of a sudden someone is tearing down your reputation, that seems like a sort of asymmetric warfare that's much harder to fight. I'm surprised that everybody doesn't use that if it's so devastating.
Because you can't maintain a relationship. There are people out there listening right now who are married to someone who is passive aggressive, or and you know how frustrating that can be, because you can't resolve conflicts unless you know like how somebody else really feels, and they can say it to your face. So that's an intersexual issue. But I think male on male, there are these mechanisms that make it easier for you guys to resolve conflicts.
Okay. And then easier to go on in a collaborative way. But if you wanted to just devastate your opponent and forget them, then to be in the shadows, sort of harming their reputation, perhaps more effective?
Probably, yeah. But then you're going to, if you're discovered, your reputation is going to take a hit, because it's not, first of all, this is not part of masculinity. That's not a manly way to handle disputes. And I just have to bring one thing up. I just thought of this. What happens in male animals when they're actually competing is escalation in there's assessment of the other's skill or ability or condition. And male animals go through what look to me like gentlemanly, ritualistic assessments, where they're like butting head. First they're roaring, take the red deer. First they're roaring. And if one guy's roar is a lot louder and deeper than yours, you're not going to go try to steal one of his females or engage. You're not going to go try to fight him. And then they go to this parallel walking thing where they walk next to each other and essentially they just walk back and forth side by side, looking out of the side of their eye, to assess the size and strength of the one next to them. And then they'll go to the next stage, which is, to lock horns. And maybe they do that for 2 seconds and one of them decides, no, this guy can kick my ass. I'm going to run away. And then sometimes they'll have an all-out battle. But they all go through these ritualized, and it's not just red deer. I was just researching these flies that do the exact same thing where they go through these stages of assessment and they don't cheat. This is what evolved in these male animals to reduce violence. That's if you go with how evolution has shaped males, it really is. There's so many adaptations that males have to reduce violence. If you follow the gentlemanly rules, that you only fight when you're evenly matched and there's something that you're fighting over that's valuable. That's what we see in nature. And that's what rough and tumble play helps boys figure out. What are the rules here? Anyway, that was an aside. Something you said made me think of that. What was that?
Just talking about it being sort of asymmetric and wanting to just get away with hurting someone rather than being out in the open.
I think it's just shitty to do that passive aggressive stuff and that it's not effective in maintaining relationships. And the goal should be to get along and maintain relationships. And plus, if you look at like chimps who are, like us, can have immense capacity for cooperation. And we humans have immense capacity for cooperation. Men in particular, women do too, but it's different. Men can cooperate in a way that is, the bonds that are formed are so deep and strong. And yes, there can be fighting within that, but if you're the passive aggressive guy who's not being direct in terms of your confrontation, it's going to interfere with the ability of men to form these bonds and cooperate as a group and reduce conflict and violence ultimately as a group.
This is interesting to me because I've seen a man who operates like this. I suspect he's sort of asexual, and sexuality is just a tool for him to influence people. He's very much a cult leader type personality. If you can kind of, imagine the type. And so I think sex is just one element of his game of controlling people. But he doesn't keep men around him is the thing. Or strong men. He'll have one guy who seems his buddy and then he becomes a henchman, but then he gets dropped. And then there's another, and then maybe that guy kind of catches on and he gets dropped. But this guy keeps many women around him. And then he uses the women to spread gossip through those women.
Who is that?
I'll tell you later.
Is this a famous person?
No, he thinks he is. I mean, he's in his own mind. But I've seen this in a man, but now I'm recognizing the pattern is that he can't keep good, strong men around him.
Yeah.
That's the trade-off.
Huh. Okay. Makes sense.
Does it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's trust. You trust a guy who comes up and tells you what he thinks, even if it's bad, right? You trust those people.
Yeah.
As long, and you can, maybe that person will then listen to you in response, but then I think there's something to be said for being direct, having a conflict, and resolving it. You're stronger after that.
Well, definitely. And among men, too, I would think often you'll like that guy better in the long run.
Yeah.
You might actually
have some respect for him.
Yeah, you might actually be closer with that guy than someone who you have sort of a peaceful friendship with no conflict.
That's right.
Just a nice relationship going along to get along. Carole, what do you think about testosterone and the way we fall in love?
Okay. No, this is good. Because we were talking about different strategies that male animals have for essentially maximizing their reproductive output. That's what it's for. That's why we have estrogen and progesterone and other sex hormones, and that's why you guys have testosterone, because we have to do different things to reproduce. So falling in love, the only purpose for being in love with a romantic partner is to solidify the bond so that your kid is more likely to survive. Because if the male partner, the father, stays around, especially in humans, then the child is more likely to survive if he's a provider and protector, for instance. And I should just say that happens in only 5% of mammals. Does the male actually hang around and invest in the offspring? Like if you look, I mentioned the red deer because I studied them a little bit I have researched them for many years, but I went to go see them on the Isle of Rum in Scotland and use some of that research and those observations for my book. Like the most successful male had a harem of something like 24 females. So that's not what we humans are doing, and that's not what most males are not investing in their kids. So falling in love is about increasing reproductive success for both the mom and the dad. And there's data now, there's research from many different species in which males do invest in the offspring, like birds and humans, and I think that's where most of the research comes from right now. But the idea is that, and there's very solid research in humans now, that when men fall in love and form a partnership with, I'm not sure if actually this works in gay men. I don't know about that, and I don't know that there's any work on that, and I'd be very interested in seeing that. But what happens is in these long-term committed relationships, we see something very similar happening in birds that form long-term pair bonds where they're essentially monogamous, that there's a stage in male development where males are out competing and looking for a partner. And that's when their testosterone is high. And they're motivated to compete, they're motivated to attract and show off. And then when there's a pair bond that is made, testosterone drops. This is very clear in these different bird species, and it's pretty clear in humans. And the reason it drops is because the need to sort of go out and compete for mates and be attracted to a bunch of different females is actually doing that is counterproductive to the reproductive goals. So that if you want to increase reproductive success, what makes sense is to suppress testosterone a bit, so you don't go out and like abandon your partner. You have sex with your partner and have babies with your partner, because that's what's going to be best for your reproduction. But to sustain that, it helps if testosterone is low, or not low, I should just say lower than whatever your normal sort of baseline testosterone is. And the bird data shows us very clearly that if you artificially raise testosterone in a male who has formed a pair bond and now has a brood of chicks, if you raise his testosterone, then he goes out, he abandons the chicks, and he starts singing and aggressing at the periphery of his territory, and he's looking for essentially sex with other females and aggressing with other males in order to do that. His kids are likely to die. So it's a bad strategy. And so testosterone helps male animals make trade-offs between in animals where males invest in their kids, between parenting and mating, and like finding other mates. So mating investment versus parental investment. So females really are mostly just investing in parenting and not competing, looking for mates. And males are investing a lot in competing, looking for mates, but then they have to shift strategy. And testosterone helps them shift their strategy to one that makes sense to maximize their reproductive output.
Okay.
So that's falling in love. That's my answer to falling in love.
And so testosterone then, it converts male energy into making offspring. But at the same time,
Yes,
it
through like
goes.
musculature or through,
Mhm,
brighter feathers or singing. That's all testosterone. Like in
mhm.
humans and birds and antlers and the red deer, it's increasing mating via these physical characteristics and behavioral characteristics that are calibrated to the social environment and the ecological environment, like how much energy is available.
Okay, and yet the male system knows when to tone that down so that then that male can invest in the offspring that the
I
testosterone
didn't
has
even
driven him to
mention the
produce.
baby, that the guy is going to fall in love with the baby. Guys who think they don't want kids, my husband. I
Hmm.
met him in my late 30s. I had the actual kid at 43. He's 6 years older than I am. He said he didn't want kids. And I was like, well, whatever. I guess I'm too old to have kids anyway, but at least I'll marry the guy. Um, but then he said we could have kids, had the baby, and he wasn't like super into the baby at first, because it takes the guy interacting with that stimulus, with the baby stimulus, which at first maybe the guy's kind of like, eh. But then, and this happens in other animals where you can get a male to really invest in the offspring if you expose it to the baby or the chick or whatever it is enough. And this totally happened with my husband. And that is when testosterone drops again. So it solidifies the investment in the offspring. And again, if testosterone goes up at that point, there's going to be less investment in the offspring. So all these guys who are fiddling around with their testosterone are not fiddling around. They're taking testosterone and raising it. They're blocking all of these signals, all of this calibration. And falling in love might be more awesome if your testosterone is a little bit lower, and having a kid might be much more enjoyable and tolerable, and like you're going to invest more in that kid when your testosterone is a bit lower. So if you there's great research that shows that fathers who have babies but don't interact with them much do not have that same adjustment. So it's really interacting with your partner, interacting with your kid, um, falling in love with your partner, falling in love with your kid. Yes, suppresses testosterone a little bit, and it's not a bad thing. Like, get over it. It's a great thing. And it might feel great if people would just let it happen and understand why.
And it's as easy as being more exposed to the baby?
Yes. In caring for it, holding it, like physically
Mm,
engaging with the baby.
wow. Carole, we talked in the beginning about your dreams and the male sex drive as being maybe in some ways divorced from seeing the other person. What do you think about testosterone and just antisocial behavior, not recognizing the value of other people, even psychopathy? There are more male psychopaths than female psychopaths.
Yeah. I'm not an expert in
Hmm.
that area, and so I don't want to go out of my lane here. But there is research on humans and non-human animals, believe it or not, showing that females are in fact more empathetic
Mm.
than males, and it makes all the sense in the world to me that this is caused uh, ultimately. Of course, there's all of this is interaction between genes and hormones and culture, and the environment. Everything is about gene environment interactions. So here the culture would matter, right? But it seems pretty clear that uh, empathy, so yes, even male animals show less empathy than female animals, and women tend to be, and girls, more empathetic than boys and men. And it would make sense if, over human evolutionary history, male physical competition, which would require really hurting another human being on purpose, right? For empathy to be somewhat suppressed. And I do think that's a testosterone action. I don't know if it's a prenatal effect, or my guess is that it would be a prenatal, largely a prenatal effect, and that could be then made more intense in puberty. I'm not sure about the pubertal effect. But of course, if there's a predisposition for something, if there's a sex difference for something, of course, you're going to see variance in that trait. And you're going to have, again, more extreme expressions of that trait, more extreme manifestations of that trait in males. And it just so happens that when male traits are made more extreme, they tend to have much more serious consequences for society. So, I'm sure that there's a left tail of like hyper empathetic men, but no one cares about them, right? What we care about are the ones who are causing serious problems. But again, I think this has to do with this heightened variance among men and these more extreme forms of really damaging and dangerous behaviors that don't characterize all men. And that's the problem with the culture of masculinity. It is unfortunate, and it makes me sad that this huge part of masculinity is not part of the stereotype. It's the stereotype is so weighted by these extremes of masculinity that most of those extremes are, harmful to society, right? And we've got to widen the scope here about what manly behavior is like.
Yeah. Well, Carole Hooven, before we get to our last topic, where's the best place for people to look for you online?
I think I'm Carole.Hooven on Instagram, and maybe I'll start posting more stuff on there. But Twitter really is where I don't spend a huge amount of time on there, but I am on there, and I post sometimes. And I'm Hoovlet, Hoovlet at Hoovlet. Sorry, that's what I am.
Okay.
That's about it.
All right. We'll put links in the description for everyone to check out. And last, Carole, you've started to allude to your thoughts on masculinity and how we should approach it. What else do you think people should be aware of about masculinity and testosterone?
Well, I think people should be aware that testosterone is a reproductive hormone. That's what it's for. It's for reproduction. So these behaviors that we've been talking about in other animals, these are reproductive behaviors. The aggression, the showing off, the getting in each other's faces, the denigrating rivals, those are reproductive behaviors. Falling in love is a reproductive behavior. Being a dad, obviously, having sex. And testosterone in a natural environment is kind of helps males calibrate their development, their bodies, and their behavior and coordinate everything to maximize reproduction. And there's nothing bad about it. It doesn't mean aggression. It can mean choosing. It can mean, it's not even choosing. It's that, a certain reproductive strategy is taken. And again, that often is just being a really good husband and dad. And that's not anti-testosterone or low testosterone. This whole idea that's around now that a high testosterone guy is a guy who wants to go to war. That's just not. That's not what it is. It doesn't mean that to be a man means to be aggressive or to go to war. That's not correct. Even in looking at human research and non-human animals also. So there are a lot of risks for young men, especially to take testosterone. You probably have talked about those before, and they're very serious risks. I would like young men to know that if you take testosterone while you're still in puberty and even after that, you really are potentially interfering with your long-term ability to produce sperm and to ever have your own child. That you can have long-term permanent effects on your brain and body that are very serious, and I would think very, very hard about taking testosterone, especially as a young person. You have so much, and you should just let it do what it does, because that's all you need. You got a shitload if you're a young man. So there's my little rant about that.
Well, Dr. Carole Hooven, for helping us all to understand this hormone a little better and for taking this interview with me, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brad, for having me.
Thanks for watching my interview. To go even deeper on these ideas, you can watch my episode on female sexual competition with Dr. Danny Solokovsky using the link in the description or the box on the screen.